By the time the elevator reached the lobby, the decision had already been made. Rowan Carter didn't look back. He carried a single manila folder under his arm. Not a box, not a bag, just the folder, because that was all he had brought in that morning, and that was all he was leaving with. The security badge sat on Gerald Whitmore's desk upstairs. Rowan had placed it there himself, quietly, while the man was still in the middle of his speech about company standards and breach of protocol. Gerald had paused mid-sentence. Rowan had nodded once, turned, and walked to the elevator. The lobby of Halcyon Medical Partners was all glass and pale marble, the kind of entrance designed to make visitors feel small. Rowan had never been impressed by it. He pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the February air, which was cold and direct, the way cold in Chicago always was. No warning, no softening. He stood on the sidewalk for 37 seconds. He knew because he counted. It was a habit from his residency back when 30 seconds of stillness between crises was what passed for rest. Then he took out his phone and made a call. It rang twice. "Conrad," he said when the line picked up, "I need you to pull the full board together, tonight if possible." A pause. "Yes, all of them." Another pause, longer, "Because I just walked out of Halcyon, and I need to tell you what I found before someone tries to bury it." He hung up, flagged a cab, and did not look up at the building behind him. He already knew what was happening on the 14th floor. He had been watching it for 11 days. Rowan Carter had taken the position at Halcyon Medical Partners for reasons he had never fully explained to anyone, including himself. On paper, it looked odd. He was 51 years old. He had spent 22 years building a reputation in hospital administration, restructuring failing departments, turning around cost centers that had been written off, identifying systemic breakdowns before they became lawsuits. The last institution he had worked with had offered him a 10-year contract. He had finished the engagement in 14 months and declined the extension. Halcyon was different. Halcyon was a private medical management group that oversaw 7 regional hospital networks across the Midwest, handling everything from staffing models to pharmaceutical procurement to quality assurance. It was, by most external measures, a functioning organization. Its numbers were clean. Its compliance record was recent and positive. The board received quarterly reports that showed steady margins and controlled growth. But the board had a problem they didn't know how to name. Conrad Whitfield, not the Gerald who ran HR, but Conrad, the board chair, had reached out to Rowan 6 weeks ago with a single question: why is the clinical quality team turning over at twice the industry average? Rowan had asked for 30 days and a junior-level cover identity. Conrad had given him both. What Rowan had not told Conrad yet was what he had found in the first 11 days. His cover was simple. He came in as Rowan Carter, contractor, assigned to assist with a documentation backlog in the clinical quality division on the 14th floor. No credentials listed beyond the administrative, no title, a temporary badge, a desk near the window that no one else wanted because the heating vent above it was broken. The 14th floor had a particular ecology to it. It was the kind of workplace that had organized itself around the wrong people, not through malice at the top, not through any single decision, but through years of inattention. The floor had been managed for 3 years by a woman named Sabrina Locke, whose authority over performance reviews had never been formally checked by anyone above her. Below Sabrina stood 2 deputies she had promoted herself, a man named Curtis Vane, who handled staffing allocations, and a woman named Renee Dodd, who controlled internal communications and scheduling. The 3 of them had built something that functioned, on the surface, like a team. Underneath, it was a machine for consolidating credit and distributing blame. Rowan had watched it for 11 days before he had enough. He watched Sabrina spend 40 minutes in a Tuesday morning stand-up dismantling a report submitted by a junior analyst named Monica Presley. Not because the analysis was wrong, but because Monica had sent the draft directly to a department head without copying Sabrina first. The error was procedural, minor. Sabrina treated it like a disciplinary matter. Monica sat very still throughout, her hands flat on the table, her face composed in the particular way of someone who had learned that any expression would be used against her. He watched Curtis reroute a project attribution in the internal tracking system, quietly changing the lead name on a completed audit from a senior analyst named Felix Okafor. No relation to the Renata Okafor in other divisions, to himself. Felix had done the work. Curtis had reviewed it once, made 2 suggestions, and was now listed as the primary contributor. The revision was made on a Wednesday afternoon, 4 days before the audit was submitted to the board's subcommittee. He watched Renee Dodd manage the scheduling system in ways that were never formally documented. Staff who questioned Sabrina's decisions found their project assignments shifted. Staff who praised her publicly found their schedules accommodating, their requests approved quickly. It was not written down anywhere. It did not need to be. After long enough, people simply adjusted their behavior without being told why. What Rowan also saw on the 14th floor were people trying very hard in difficult conditions. Monica Presley arrived 40 minutes early every morning. She reviewed the previous day's work before the floor was populated, caught her own errors before they could be used against her, and still managed to produce analysis that was, by any objective measure, exceptional. Felix Okafor asked no questions about his rerouted credit. He simply started the next project. There was a woman named Hazel Strang who spent her lunch breaks mentoring 2 newer analysts, unpaid without asking for acknowledgement, because she had apparently decided that the floor's dysfunction wasn't going to stop her from doing her job properly. And there was a man named Patrick Wren, 56 years old, 23 years at Halcyon, who had submitted 3 separate requests over the past 2 years to have the quality review process formally updated. All 3 requests had been received by Sabrina, noted in her system and not forwarded. Patrick came in every day. He did his work. He did not stop submitting requests. He had not yet given up on the institution even when the institution had given up on him. Rowan watched all of it. He took no notes on company property. He remembered. The termination came on the morning of day 11, which was a Thursday. Rowan had not been surprised when Gerald Whitmore called him into the small conference room on the 4th floor. He had known since Tuesday that something was moving. Sabrina had gone quiet in a particular way. Not the quiet of indifference, but the quiet of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for it to land. Gerald Whitmore was a compact man who had been in HR administration for 21 years, and had the posture of someone who had delivered bad news so many times it had become architecture. He sat across from Rowan with a manila folder of his own, thicker than Rowan's, and explained that a review of the documentation backlog project had identified concerns about data handling. Specifically, Gerald said, certain internal records had been accessed using Rowan's contractor credentials outside of normal working hours. Rowan asked which records. Gerald named a set of personnel files. Rowan said calmly that he had not accessed those files. Gerald said the system logs indicated otherwise. Rowan was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Has Halcyon's cybersecurity team reviewed the access logs directly, or are you working for summary provided by someone on 14? Gerald did not answer immediately. That pause told Rowan what he needed to know. "Gerald," Rowan said, "I'd like to formally request that you contact the board's general counsel before this goes any further. I'd also like you to place an administrative hold on all digital records generated by the 14th floor team in the past 30 days. Everything. Outgoing communications, system access logs, the audit attribution records, scheduling history. All of it." Gerald looked at him the way people look at someone who is saying something they don't entirely understand but feel instinctively that they should have understood earlier. "That's not a typical response to a termination notice," Gerald said. "No," Rowan agreed. "It isn't." He placed his badge on the table, stood, picked up his folder, and left. The board met that evening in a conference room on the 32nd floor of Halcyon's administrative offices, a different building entirely from the medical management offices on Wacker. Conrad Whitfield was already seated when Rowan arrived. 3 other board members were present by video. The general counsel, a woman named Pamela Hurst, had flown in from St. Louis. Rowan sat down. He did not open his folder. He told them what he had observed. He told it in order, without emphasis, the way he always delivered difficult findings, because emphasis, in his experience, caused people to argue about the emphasis rather than the findings. He described the performance review manipulation. He described the attribution rerouting. He described the scheduling system. He described Monica Presley arriving early every morning. He described Patrick Wren's 3 unanswered requests. He described the personnel file access logs that had been used to terminate him. Pamela Hurst asked how he knew the logs were fabricated if he hadn't seen them. "Because I didn't access those files," Rowan said. "And because whoever set this up used my contractor credentials, which means they had access to the credentialing system. That's a different level of authorization than what Sabrina's team should have. You need to know how they got it." The room was quiet for a long moment. Conrad looked at the other board members, then back at Rowan. "What do you need from us?" 3 things, Rowan said. "A full forensic audit of the 14th floor's digital records going back 18 months. an independent HR review of every performance evaluation and promotion decision Sabrina Locke has made in the past 3 years, and a personnel review of every staff member on that floor to identify who was harmed and what remediation looks like. Another pause. And the 3 principals? Conrad asked. Rowan set his folder on the table. He had written nothing down on company property, but he had written things down elsewhere. He slid 3 pages across the table. That's your decision, not mine. But I'd suggest you let the forensic audit run first. Whatever they did with those credentials, that's not a performance matter. That may be a legal one. The forensic audit took 9 days. What it found was this. Curtis Vane had obtained Rowan's system credentials through a contact in IT provisioning on the 2nd day of Rowan's assignment. The access to the restricted personnel files had been made from Curtis's own workstation, using Rowan's credentials, at 11:43 on a Wednesday night. 4 days before Gerald Whitmore called Rowan into the conference room. The timing was not accidental. The restricted files accessed were the files most likely to trigger an automatic security escalation. Sabrina Locke had known. Her communications with Curtis over that 4-day period made the knowledge clear. Renee Dodd had prepared the summary document that Gerald Whitmore received, the one that described the access logs as a contractor security breach, without mentioning where the summary had originated. The attribution rerouting had been happening, the audit found, for not 4 days but for 2 years and 3 months. 14 staff members had work formally misattributed. 8 of them had been passed over for promotions based on performance records that did not accurately reflect their contributions. Patrick Wren's 3 requests had been logged, then deleted from the forwarding queue. He had never been told they were received. Pamela Hurst spent 45 minutes on the phone with Rowan before the board convened its 2nd meeting. She told him that the credential theft and fabrication of security breach documentation met the threshold for referral to federal authorities. The board would make that determination. She wanted him to know in advance so he wasn't reading about it later. Rowan thanked her and asked about the staff. Pamela said that was going to be part of the 2nd meeting. The 2nd board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Rowan had walked out of the building with his manila folder. By then, word had moved through the 14th floor the way word always moves through places where people have been watching carefully and waiting, quietly, completely, and faster than anyone official intended. Rowan arrived early. He took the elevator to the 32nd floor and stood for a moment looking out at the lake, which was gray and flat in the March light. Conrad met him at the door and shook his hand without saying much. There was not much to say. The audit had said it. The meeting was brief by the standards of what it covered. The board formally approved the termination of Sabrina Locke, Curtis Vane, and Renee Dodd, effective immediately, pending the legal referral. Gerald Whitmore's handling of the termination process, his failure to question the source of the summary document, would be subject to a separate performance review. The independent HR firm would begin its engagement the following Monday. Then Conrad turned to a different section of the agenda. The board had reviewed the personnel files of the 14 staff members identified in the audit. It had reviewed Patrick Wren's 3 requests, which the IT forensics team had recovered from the deleted queue. The board was formally acknowledging, Conrad said, that these employees had been working within a deliberately distorted system, and that the institution had an obligation to correct the record. The promotion review would be conducted by the independent HR firm. Compensation adjustments would follow. Patrick Wren's 3rd request, the one for updated quality review protocols, was being forwarded to the Clinical Standards Committee immediately. Rowan said nothing. He had been asked to attend as a witness to the findings, not as a principal. He sat with his folder, which he had not opened once in this room, and listened. After the meeting, in the hallway, Conrad stopped him. "The board wants to know," Conrad said carefully, "whether you'd consider taking on the 14-month restructuring, full mandate, formal title." Rowan looked at the floor for a moment, then at Conrad. "Who's currently the senior analyst on the 14th floor?" he asked. Conrad checked something on his phone. "Monica Presley. Has she been told about the review?" "Not yet. The HR firm starts Monday." Rowan was quiet. "Then that's your first call," he said. "Not a formal notification. A personal one. From you, not from a letter. She's been coming in 40 minutes early every day, and she doesn't know yet that someone noticed." Conrad nodded slowly. "And Patrick Wren," Rowan added. "He submitted his 3rd request 14 months ago. When your office calls him, whoever makes that call should have read all 3 requests first, not a summary. The requests themselves." He paused. He's been at this institution for 23 years. He deserves to know it was worth it. Conrad was quiet for a moment. And the restructuring? Rowan picked up his folder. Ask me again after Monday, he said, once you've made those calls. On Monday morning, Monica Presley arrived at the 14th floor at 7:19, which was 41 minutes before the floor opened. She unlocked her workstation, reviewed the previous week's flagged items, caught 2 formatting inconsistencies in a pending report, and corrected them before anyone arrived who might have noticed them first. At 8:02, her phone rang. The caller ID said Conrad Whitfield, board chair. She almost did not answer. In her experience, calls from that level of the organization did not come with good news attached. She answered. Conrad told her without a letter, without a summary, that her work over the past 2 years had been systematically misrepresented in the institution's records, that the clinical audit she had led in Q3 of the previous year, the one that had been cited in the board's subcommittee report under another name, was formally being reattributed to her, that the promotion she had not received in October was being reviewed under the independent process beginning today. Monica was quiet for a long time. Conrad waited. I thought I wasn't good enough, she finally said. You were, Conrad said. The system wasn't. She hung up the phone and sat for a moment at her desk in the empty floor in the 41 minutes before anyone else arrived. Then she opened the pending report, found a 3rd inconsistency she had missed the first time, and corrected it. She was still at her desk when the floor filled up around her. She did not mention the phone call to anyone. She did the work. Across the building in a different wing, Patrick Wren's phone rang at 8:16. The voice on the other end introduced herself as a board coordinator. She told him that she had read his 3 requests. All 3, she said, not a summary, and that the 3rd one, submitted 14 months ago, was being referred to the Clinical Standards Committee that morning. Patrick was in the middle of his 2nd cup of coffee. He set it down. He did not say anything for a moment. He had been at Halcyon for 23 years. He had spent 2 of them submitting requests that had disappeared. He had not stopped, not because he believed the system would eventually listen, but because he had not been able to find a reason that justified stopping. Who authorized this? He asked. The coordinator said the board had reviewed the requests directly. Patrick picked up his coffee again. All right, he said. Thank you for calling. He finished his coffee. He opened his computer. He started on the day's work, the same as he had every morning for 23 years. Rowan Carter took the call from Conrad on Wednesday afternoon, 2 days after the HR firm began its engagement. Conrad did not ask again about the restructuring directly. He said only that the independent review was moving faster than expected, that the 14th floor had stabilized in a way that suggested the staff there were more capable than the prior management structure, had allowed anyone to see, and that the board had decided it wanted someone with a formal mandate overseeing the process. Rowan said he would think about it. He was sitting in his apartment, which looked out over a stretch of the river that went gray in winter and greens in spring. February was almost over. The light was starting to come back at the edges of the afternoon, the way it did in Chicago, slow and unconvinced at first, then suddenly certain. He thought about Monica Presley correcting a 3rd inconsistency after the phone call. He thought about Patrick Wren saying all right and going back to work. He thought about Hazel Strang spending lunch breaks mentoring analysts who had no idea that the system around them had been deliberately distorted, because she had decided the distortion wasn't going to stop her from doing what she thought the job was supposed to be. He called Conrad back that evening. I'll take the engagement, he said. Same terms as before, 18 months. Conrad started to respond with something that sounded like gratitude. One condition, Rowan said. Felix Okafor gets the audit lead on the restructuring review, not as a courtesy, because he's the most qualified person for it, and the record should reflect that. Conrad said that could be arranged. Rowan said he would see him Monday. He hung up and looked out at the river for another moment. The city moved around him the way cities do, continuous, indifferent, full of people doing their work in systems that did not always deserve them. He picked up his folder, set it on the table, and opened it for the first time in 3 weeks. There was work to do.